Okay, everyone, let's get started. Hello, and thank you so much for attending today's NEA Big Read 2021-2022 Sharing Stories webinar. I'm Lauren Miller, the NEA Big Read Program Manager at the National Endowment for the Arts. And before we jump in here, just a couple housekeeping items to note. I believe everyone should be muted, and if you're able to keep your mic on mute throughout the entirety of this presentation, we'd really appreciate it. Also, we'll have a closed captioning service available via Wordly. You'll be able to find that link in the chat box at the bottom of your screen. Finally, we'll be having a Q&A at the end of the session. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, so feel free to submit your questions there, and we'll do our best to address those at the end of this webinar. So we have a few other speakers at this webinar that I'm going to ask to briefly introduce themselves. First, I'm going to ask Joshua Feist at Arts Midwest to say hello.
Hello, everybody. It's Josh from Arts Midwest. I'm the Director of Grant Making there.
Great. Thank you, Josh. Ellen, would you say hi? Erin?
Hi, this is Erin Halliwell from Homer, Alaska.
And Jody?
Hi everyone, I'm Jody Zalk. I'm from Malden Reads in Malden, Massachusetts.
And Anne?
Hi, I'm Ann Derso Rose. I'm with Jody as co-facilitator for the Malden Reads One City, One Book program in Malden, Massachusetts.
Thank you all. So to briefly just go over what we're going to go over on today's agenda. So I'll be giving a brief overview of the program, then presenting each of the 6 books and authors that we just recently announced last month and providing some related resources. Then Josh will get into the nitty-gritty details on how to apply for an NEA Big Read grant. And then we'll hear from our 2 NEA Big Read grantees who will share their stories and experiences with the program. And then we hope you all have some questions for us that we'll be able to answer. So the NEA Big Read is an initiative managed by Arts Midwest that provides grants annually to selected nonprofit organizations around the country to host dynamic community-wide reading programs, each designed around a single NEA Big Read selection. These grants range from $5,000 to $20,000, which is a slight increase over the past couple of years where the maximum amount was $15,000. And NEA Big Read programming may last as short as a week or as long as several months. There really is great flexibility here. Applicants and grantees can decide what length of programming fits their needs the best. And also programming may be virtual. We've seen some really great virtual programming this year, ranging from virtual author talks and panels, student exhibitions of artwork and poetry, and more. So to give you a highlight of some of the program's history and statistics, since the NEA Big Read began in 2006, there has been more than 1,600 NEA Big Read programs, more than $22 million in grants to organizations in every district of the country, more than $50 million in local funding, more than 5.7 million Americans in attendance of an NEA Big Read event, with approximately 91,000 local volunteers and more than 39,000 community partner organizations. We're really proud of this program's reach and growth, and we're very much eager to continue to try to reach as many communities as we can around the country. So these are the 6 available reading selections for the 2021-2022 NEA Big Read programming year. Some are new to the program and some have previously been a part of the Big Read. I'll go into them in more detail in just a bit, but they include An American Sunrise by Joy Harjo, Beloved by Tony Morrison, The Best We Can Do, an illustrated memoir by T. Bowie, The Call of the Wild, White Fang and Other Stories by Jack London, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, and The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. These titles explore the theme of American history and culture. They present an array of voices, perspectives, time periods, and genres that can help us as a nation to reflect on where we've been, where we are today, and where we're going. The Arts Endowment and Arts Midwest works with the reading committee to explore options for the NEA Big Read book list, not only to meet what I stated previously, but also to look at the capacity of each book to incite lively and deep discussion and really inspire innovative programming for communities. We also consider suggestions from the public, and you can send your recommendations for books to be included in the NEA Big Read on arts.gov. Finally, before we move on deeper into these titles, in addition to these books, applicants may also consider to create programming with other companion books, meaning other literary titles that relate to, in some way, either thematically or historically, to the NEA Big Read book chosen. Companion titles can span other genres such as YA, children's book, poetry, graphic novels, etc. And previous NEA Big Read grantees have created really successful events and activities surrounding companion titles, and we encourage applicants to consider these companion titles for their programming. So first up is An American Sunrise, a collection of poems by the current US Poet Laureate, Joy Harjo. This collection, Harjo's eighth, revisits the homeland from which her ancestors were uprooted in 1830 as a result of the Indian Removal Act. The poems immerse the reader in the power of nature, spirituality, memory, and the splintered history of Americans' indigenous people. An American Sunrise was added to the NEA Big Read library just last year, and another collection by Harjo, How We Became Human, has been on the NEA Big Read list, and we're excited for more communities to read Harjo's poems and create programming around this title. Next, we move to 1873 with Tony Morrison's Pulitzer Prize winning novel, Beloved. This is the first year this title has been on the NEA Big Read list. Beloved is set in Cincinnati, Ohio, about one woman's struggle to raise her daughter while coping with the memories of her life as an enslaved person in pre-Civil War Kentucky. The book explores the lives of Setha and her daughter. Their home has been haunted for years by what they believe is the ghost of Setha's eldest daughter. Dedicated to the estimated 60 million and more people who died as a result of the Atlantic slave trade, Beloved combines magical and realistic elements to explore themes of justice, memory, and family. Now we're moving on to The Best We Could Do, an illustrated memoir by T. Bowie. This graphic memoir is about the lasting effects of one family's journey from war-torn Vietnam in the 1970s to a new life in America and the universal challenges of becoming a new parent. The book delves into T's family history as it does Vietnam's through a beautifully illustrated and emotional story about the search for a better future and a longing for an understanding of the past. The Best We Can Do addresses topics such as identity, displacement and assimilation, race, and historical movements. This is T's debut work as both author and illustrator, and it was a finalist for the 2017 National Book Critics Circle Award. The next title is The Call of the Wild, White Fang, and Other Stories by Jack London. Now, The Call of the Wild was in the NEA Big Read library previously, and now we're reintroducing the title with additional short stories by London. We have a couple titles this year that we're reintroducing to the NEA Big Read, and for those communities that have received grants in the past for one of these titles, including Call of the Wild, they may apply for a grant to program this title again. And if an organization chooses to reprogram a title, they must provide an explanation for doing so and a description of how they intend to revisit this text with new programming in their application. So this title is a collection of short and long tales of heroism and hardship by London, featuring canine protagonists and set in the Pacific Northwest in the Klondike Gold Rush of the late 1800s. The Call of the Wild is about a dog learning to survive the wilderness. White Fang is a story of a wolf-dog hybrid struggling to survive in a human society which it finds every bit as brutal as the natural world. This volume also includes an early feminist story, The Nightborn, and a labor story, South of the Slot. London's narratives in this edition speak to topics that are still relevant today, including the environment, animal rights, and socioeconomic issues. And now we move to another title that was formerly on the NEA Big Read list, The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. First published in 1939, Steinbeck's Pulitzer Prize winning novel chronicles the harrowing westward migration from Oklahoma to California during the time of the Dust Bowl and the Great Depression. The novel begins with young Tom Jones' return from home, a prison term, to find his family's Oklahoma farmstead in ruins and deserted. He's soon locates his relatives nearby, preparing to leave their land for the promise of new life in California. We follow their travails and partake of their hopes, only to share in disappointment when California's agricultural bounty is not quite what they expected. Last but not least, we end in the 1980s with The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros, who is a two-time recipient of a National Endowment for the Arts Literature Fellowship. This novel is a series of interconnected vignettes about a year in the life of a young Mexican-American girl growing up in Chicago in the 1980s. Based in part of Cisneros' own experience, the novel follows the main character, Esperanza Cordora, a 12-year-old girl as she enters adolescence and begins to face the realities of life as a young woman. Sandra has said in an interview about The House of Mango Street on NPR that, quote, "I wanted to write something in a voice that was unique to who I was. And I wanted something that was accessible to the person who works at Dunkin' Donuts or who drives a bus, someone who comes home with their feet hurting like my father, someone who's busy and has too many children like my mother. I wanted this to be lyrical enough so that it would pass muster with my finicky classmates, but also open to accept all of the people I loved in the neighborhood I came from." So those are the 6 titles available for programming for the 2021-22 NEA Big Read year. And we're really looking forward to communities reading these books and creating engaging programming events and activities around these titles and themes. Resources for each title, which includes information about the book, an author bio, discussion questions, and a teacher's guide, will be made available for the 6 new books in spring 2021. You can find resources for titles available for the 2020-21 grant year and archived books on arts.gov/NEA Big Read. I'll hand it over to Josh soon, who will go into more details of what NEA Big programming entails. But before I do, we wanted to offer some resources on a few ways. You can find local writers in your area in case you want to work with a writer or teaching artist to develop workshops or other programming. First, your state's arts agency is really a great resource. You can find details about your state arts agency either on arts.gov or the National State Assembly website, nasa-arts.org. We also have really great NEA creative writing fellows across the country, and you can find that list at arts.gov. And the Poets and Writers Directory at www.pw.org offers a really an easy search engine where you can search by geography and other filters. And last but not least, feel free to contact the NEA Literary Arts team directly at litfellowships@arts.gov if you want to brainstorm any ideas. And I'll drop these links in the chat. And with that being said, I am now going to hand it over to Josh Feist, who's going to go into more details about the application process for the NEA Big Read.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Sorry for that little delay there. I'm just getting set up here, and I know that we see a lot of questions coming through. Thank you for putting those into the Q&A box, and just a reminder that we will address as many of those as we can towards the end. So thank you for your patience there. Again, I'm Joshua Feist. I'm the Director of Grant Making at Arts Midwest. And just to be clear, our team at Arts Midwest facilitates the NEA Big Read on behalf of the National Endowment for the Arts. And we are based in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So Central Time is kind of how we operate, but we know that this is a national program. And so we try and work with everybody in various different time zones. So what I'm going to be talking about here for my portion of this presentation is the application process for the grant and give a little tour of where all the important stuff is. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit more about the question of eligibility, since I know that's come up in the chat and Q&A already. And some folks have assumed that because our name is Arts Midwest, that this opportunity is only open to organizations in the Midwest, but I'm happy to say that that's not the case. It is a nationwide opportunity that includes the Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, Guam, the Northern Marianas Islands, and American Samoa, so anywhere within the nation. And I will just say that if you are not one of the eligible organizations, as you can see briefly listed here in the second bullet, that you can collaborate with an eligible organization and plan your NEA Big Read together. And an NEA Big Read does require the commitment and buy-in of many community partners. And so you could be involved in, for example, planning or hosting some of the events in your proposed schedule. And let's make sure that we're all clear on what this project grant is for. Essentially, the goal is to get as many participants reading the book and engaging with it, as well as other members of the community. And through the process, the whole community reading the same book at the same time, the idea is that the community becomes smaller and a little bit more close-knit, and that people can walk a mile in another person's shoes via engaging with the content of the book and attending events. It's really about discovering great literature, inspiring conversations, and building communities. The NEA Big Read programs that you propose in your applications should be enticing to readers and non-readers alike and serve to inspire participants to read the book by engaging with the content and themes of the book. And each program you host should always tie back to the book in some way. Now, there are some requirements outlined in the guidelines, and we're going to go over those in a second. But there's quite a bit of freedom in those requirements to tailor your program that will resonate with your target audiences and introduce books that also relate thematically. So I'll go ahead and mention those requirements now and note that these requirements can overlap, meaning that if you fulfill multiple requirements, you can fulfill multiple requirements with one event, depending on how that event is structured. So there's a kickoff event, which is your big splash. Maybe you're at the farmer's market, or you're doing more of a virtual kickoff event by releasing a YouTube video, or you're hosting your own socially distanced parade to generate a lot of publicity in your community. The mayor could issue a proclamation, and volunteers could hand out copies of the book from a safe distance. So we really envision this being a flexible program this year by allowing almost all of these requirements to take place virtually if that's what you want to do. So I'm just going to put that out there right there. The second requirement is the 5 book discussions, and we have kind of a loose definition of a book discussion. In the traditional sense, it's a book club where people gather around a table in a room and talk about the book at a library, for instance. So long as there's some back and forth dialogue about the book at any event, it can meet their criteria for a book discussion. So for example, you can have an in-person or virtual theatrical presentation of a scene from the book, and maybe there's a talk back period with the audience afterwards, and that would fulfill the book discussion criteria, as well as a community engagement project, which I'll get to in a second. Next, we're going to talk about the 2 presentations. They should be inspired by the content or themes of the book, and some examples of these would be a panel discussion, an author talk. If you choose one of the books that has a living author, you can decide to bring them in, but that's not a requirement. Another example would be a film screening. And then the last piece on the slide here is about 2 community engagement response projects. And these are what we'll hear more from our guests on the call today, the prior Big Read grantees. And these can include art exhibitions, theatrical performances, poetry slams, writing workshops or contests, or just finding a vehicle to share stories from the community. So if you've applied to the program in the past or been funded in the past, you'll notice that the programming requirements have changed a little bit. So we replaced what was once the keynote with the 2 presentations element. Everything else pretty much remains the same. We noticed that the vast majority of communities were meeting the 2 presentation criteria anyway. All right, so now that we have a little bit more clarity on that, we'll walk through the application process now. So here's a general timeline of the process between today and when your organization will be notified of your application status in April. And we hope everybody attending will consider submitting an application. I'd like to call out one specific bullet point under the first column, and that is that we highly encourage you to contact us at Arts Midwest, and we'll throw up our contact information at the end. So that we can discuss any details that you're unsure about, if you want to run some ideas past us, or if you want us to double check your work as you're working on your application. We're here to support you through it all. All right, so if you like what you're hearing so far, you can stick with us and we'll give you a brief tour of the Arts Midwest website, and we'll show you the steps on how to apply, give you some pointers. So our guidelines page is kind of our one-stop shop this year for grabbing a copy of the guidelines. It's all listed in the bullets there. If you go to that website link, which is on the top of the slide, and we'll throw that in the chat as well. So you can grab a copy of the guidelines in Word format, and that will help you guide through the process. You'll have the application templates here that we provided so that you can work on them offline, and then when you're ready to complete the application in the portal, you can just upload those when you're done. And then I highly recommend downloading the application checklist so that you got everything covered. You can actually check things off as you go through. And by the way, my segment of the presentation is kind of ordered in the steps that are in that document. So check out those informational resources. After determining your eligibility and your interest, we have a short intent to apply form, which is kind of the next step where we'll gather some basic information about your organization. Really, we're just looking for address, people to contact, your EIN number, and that's pretty much it. So there is a link to the intent to apply on the Arts Midwest website, and we can throw a link into the chat there as well. All right, so this is a grant derived from federal funds, as you might imagine, since the National Endowment for the Arts is the funder in this case. So the first step there is to acquire a DUNS number if you don't have one already. If you don't, it's a really straightforward and quick process at the website listed here. And once you have that, your next task will be to take that DUNS number and use it to complete a registration at sam.gov. The sam.gov process can take a little time, but you don't have to have it complete by the time the application deadline rolls around. It will just need to be in place before we can disperse any grant funds should you receive an award. And both of those processes are totally free, by the way. So when you've submitted the intent to apply, you'll get access to what we call at Arts Midwest the online community at this web address. And it's where you're going to be working on the application, and you can also chat with other applicants or past grantees in the message boards, which are currently organized by book. So after you submit the intent to apply, you'll get a follow-up email from Arts Midwest, and that will get you into the online community. And from there, you'll be working on your case, which is just another way of saying your application. And then navigating to your application will be explained in that communication after you submit your intent to apply to Arts Midwest. But here's just a snapshot on the screen of kind of what it'll look like once you're in. And here's a quick view of the discuss section I mentioned, where the message boards are organized by book or theme. So you can, if you're thinking about applying for the house on Mango Street, for instance, there's a space there to chat with other prospective applicants and bounce some ideas off each other if you want to do that. In this community, you can chat with other applicants, as I mentioned, or current grantees, but your case files, your application, are private to you and any members of your team that you want to designate. If you need some further ideas about what others have done for this program in the past, you can peruse the Arts Midwest website. We have a bunch of resources here. And then our friends at the NEA at arts.gov have examples of past programming as well if you click into one of the books on their site. So there's a section of those pages for certain books labeled Stories from the Community. And the one I find personally most inspiring is from Santa Barbara and their programs that were held amidst the Thomas Fire about 3 years ago. And of course, there's the online community, which we just talked about in those discussed boards, but there's also some sections with additional resources like finding bulk distributors for books and some training videos, such as how to host a book discussion. Again, a common question we get from applicants is what's been done in the past in terms of programming, or more generally, what kinds of events are done for the program. And we've developed a number of resources to help answer those questions as well. First off, we've been showcasing examples of NEA Big Reads from across the country on the Arts Midwest blog, which you can get to by clicking on the news link in the navigation once you're on the site. And in fact, we're releasing another one very shortly about a community that pivoted their programs during the pandemic. And actually that's up right now if memory serves correctly. We've also written some posts that are more geared toward applicant audiences in terms of strategizing in the proposal phase. And we've dubbed those posts the survival guide. You can find it in the drop-down menu under how to apply. And those are centered around the topics of partnerships, marketing and promotion, and then programming ideas. So check those out if you are so inclined. And again, as I mentioned earlier, you're welcome to just talk with Arts Midwest directly on a 15-minute or so conversation. And again, we'll put up our contact information at the end of the slide, but you can also find it on the Arts Midwest website as well. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter for all the latest updates and stories about the program. You can also search the hashtag, which is on the slide now, to find stories and updates about the program. And you can get a sense of what's been done for the grant in the past there. So I'm about to hand it over to our guest speakers in a minute, and we wanted them to speak to y'all a little bit about their wonderful community engagement projects, since that's the direction we're encouraging more this year, which is to say gathering community stories and showcasing them in some way that relate to the themes and context of the book that you will select. Their examples involve partnerships with local media outlets, and just know that we don't want you to feel overwhelmed about doing this component of the program at the level that they demonstrate. You should use the resources available in your community and do what makes the most sense and aligns with your organizational capacity. So our first speaker is Erin Halliwell from Alaska, who will share a little bit more about the community engagement program she coordinated for the program back in 2013. So I invite her to go ahead and present.
Hi. Thank you, Josh. Hi, I'm Erin Halliwell. I'm the former coordinator of the Friends of the Homer Public Library. Homer is a small town at the end of the road in Alaska. There are about 5,500 people living in town and another 4,000 in the surrounding area. About 1,500 of those are across the bay in small towns that are completely off the road system. The Homer Public Library services all of them. In 2013, the Friends of the Homer Public Library held a big read of the book, The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. We had many projects and book discussions, but we decided that instead of making the Vietnam War the focus of the events, we would instead make the focus about the power of story itself. And to that end, we wanted to bring the public into the storytelling process. So we set up a partnership with our local public radio station. Public radio is wonderful. They would donate the engineering and studio time, and we used some of the funds from the NEA to pay for half of that engineering, and then the staff donated half of their time. We publicized it as following. Community members are welcome to record a 2.5 to 3 minute true life story that they would like to preserve. This story can be about any significant experience, not exclusively a war experience. Elders in the community are particularly sought for memorializing the early stories of Homer. And I should tell you that in Alaska, when we say elders, we mean two different groups. We mean Alaska Native elders, which are very highly respected group of people in our state, and also what we call pioneers, which are people who've been here since the 40s or 50s. We're a very young state. I, as the coordinator of the project, handled all the scheduling. I'm going to start with the hurdles that we had to overcome so you can learn from my error. We had to repeatedly clarify that these did not need to be war stories. The book itself is about the Vietnam War, but we wanted to make sure that people understood it could be anything. We had to make sure that the participants came with a story written down that was approximately 300 to 500 words. Those that just came in with a story to tell off the top of their heads often spilled over the time allotment. And additionally, stories that weren't written down became disjointed and digressive. Some stories had to be drastically edited by the engineers for time. This involved me working with the engineers. This issue cleared up after I started asking people to bring a script. We didn't get as many volunteers as we thought. So I actually had to actively solicit stories from individuals that I knew would do a good job. And this required a pretty deep involvement with the community. I needed to know who to ask. And finally, writing a script was pretty intimidating for some people. So I ended up going and sitting with them and taking dictation, helping them write outlines. It was time consuming, but really worth it. That said, when the projects were finished, the stories were mastered by the radio with a project introduction that I had recorded and some music, and they played throughout the weeks during the Big Read and following it. And for some time afterwards, they were available on the Friends of the Homer Public Library website, although they've been taken down at this point because it's 7 years ago. Here are some of the successes that made the project, which seemed initially so straightforward, but which became a lot more complex, worthwhile. Family interaction. Several of the storytellers were older people who ended up doing the project because younger family members encouraged them and assisted them, came in with them to the radio studio, sat with them and helped them work on their stories. So there was a lot of family interaction. We brought in new voices. Because the public radio and the local newspaper advertised the project, we had folks participate that were not even registered library patrons, but once they participated, they felt a lot more comfortable coming into the library, and they came in more often and actually asked to speak with me and referenced the project. And finally, this whole thing was a spark point. The entire Big Read focusing on stories, truth, healing, ownership of the events of our lives really sparked a lot of opportunity for individuals to connect through their stories. Even people who did not eventually come in to record stories spent time considering what stories they might want to tell or how their viewpoint might have influenced the way they perceived events. Sometimes those stories didn't get shared any further than the dinner table. But because we were telling them that their stories were important, they got shared finally. In fact, one woman stopped into the library and told me that one evening her father just started telling a story about his time during the Vietnam War, and that he had never to that point spoken to anybody about it. And she thanked me for the gift that it gave her and her family to know him better. So even though it was a very complicated project, it ended up being really worthwhile. And it might have helped that I'm a published writer and I could help people along, but I highly recommend it. And now I'm going to hand this over to Ann Durso-Rose and Jody Zalk to take over and tell their story.
Fabulous. Thank you, Erin, so much. Such a worthwhile project. So Anne is going to share her screen. We have a presentation in a Google Drive. So that way this link, hopefully Josh can put this in the chat, or he'll share this with everyone after the presentation. And we, at the outset, really want to thank Josh at Arts Midwest. I also want to echo what he had said, because it really was amazing how supportive he and his team were as we had applied for the NEA Big Read grant. Also want to thank Amy and Lauren for the opportunity to speak and share our stories today. We really are humbled and honored to be with you this afternoon, or rather this afternoon for us here in Malden, Massachusetts. Next slide, please, Anne. And here we just wanted to give folks a brief background on Malden Reads. We are a community read, and we had been selected last year for reading Fahrenheit 451, and we became Malden Reads, NEA Big Read, Malden Read. So we wanted to share with you our experience with some of the programs that we had done supporting Fahrenheit 451, which became incredibly timely and relevant last year. And on this slide, you can see our web addresses, our information, and please as well, you can see our emails. Please feel free to get in touch with us at any point if you have any questions for us. We'll try to answer some afterwards, but please reach out as well. We wanted to share with you all a menu of options of some digital offerings, some of which had been planned before COVID, but these really have been planned to cast a wide net to spark ideas for a diverse audience. We wanted to, as you can see, highlight the partnerships that we've had with other organizations. We really feel that's a way that has been integral to our success in Malden Reads, to really be able to partner with organizations and leverage their constituents and members. In particular, I'm going to be speaking on the Mass Memories Roadshow, and then Anne will share some information about the other items here, as those are more directly related with MATV UMA, which is one of our anchor institutions, our local access cable. So this is one of our events that we had been planning for an in-person event, but when COVID hit, unfortunately, all of a sudden we couldn't have 300 people gathered together. So we planned a Stuck at Home edition. This is a grant opportunity from our University of Massachusetts at Boston. This is really a photo sharing project tied with sharing community stories. Next slide, Anne. Thank you. And so this partnership, the UMass Boston team will come on site, and for our Stuck at Home edition, their UMass team collected photos, digitized photos in an online archive. And as part of that online archive, there is an opportunity to share stories, to describe those stories. This is really telling oral histories and sharing personal photos about a point in time for folks from Malden. The tie-in here for our NEA Big Read grant was Fahrenheit 451. We really wanted to bring life to protagonist Guy Montag and his dissidents, who both were preserving stories and collecting memories. And so we were able to do this with a Stuck at Home edition of the Roadshow, and we'll have an in-person opportunity as soon as we're able to do that. And on the next couple of slides, I want to just share with you what that online archive looks like. Here are a few photos as samples of some locally important events, a 4th of July, a race, a parade for the holidays. And here in Massachusetts, we have a lot of snow. So some big storms really were also important to folks. And with each photo, folks submit a story So you can see here, this is the, I guess, metadata that's provided for each of the photos, the person's story that goes with each photo, as well as other information that's tagged. So that way the information in the archive is entirely searchable. So with that, I will turn this over to Anne, who can describe some of our other initiatives.
Okay, in order to find my microphone, I had to stop sharing my screen. So I'm going to share it once again now. And there you go. Okay. Everyone can see that. Okay, thank you, Jody. So, so the other thing that we did was a podcast series called Malden Reads Fahrenheit 451. I was the host and producer of it, and I would really recommend considering doing this with your book. Podcasts are really big right now, and it's kind of a safe social distancing way of discussing a book. And what I love about it is that you get to model talking about a book. So what we would do is we would talk to different people in the community as guests and dive into the book, but not only talk about the themes and the characters and all of that, but use it as a jumping off point about how that book influences them, or what it made them think about, or how to relate it to what is happening today. So you can see our 4 episodes. Our very first guest was the deputy fire chief. And if you know Fahrenheit 451, you know the main character is a fireman. And turns out our fire chief is an avid reader. And he told us, you know, we talked about the importance of reading and his elementary school teacher who got him to love to read. And it was just a wonderful conversation. We had our mayor, he always reads our books. We've been doing this for 11 years. He's read every book. We had a minister who loves science fiction. So we used that as a jumping off point. But of course, when we did that interview, that was at the very beginning of the pandemic. And so we talked a lot about the dystopic novel and the sort of dystopic times we were entering. We had, it was really, you can search for it on Spotify or Apple Podcasts and listen to it. We had planned a lot more episodes, but quite frankly, though this was a wonderful choice, Fahrenheit 451, when the pandemic hit, people didn't really want to read. It was almost too dystopic for the times that we were living with. And so we kind of pivoted our programming a bit. So we didn't quite get as far in the series we wanted, but we're very proud of the 4 episodes that we did. Another thing that we did was we sponsored a couple of storytelling workshops. The first one was more about getting people to tell stories, sort of a la what Erin was talking about in Alaska, and almost in the style of The Moth in NPR. And that was really great, but it was difficult. We encountered a lot of the challenges that Erin did to tell a sort of complete story. So the second time we focused on what we called Where I Am From poems. And so the participants in the stories, and we did this virtually because this was post-pandemic. And we partnered with a local writer and a spoken word artist who led these workshops. And we brought together an intentionally diverse group of participants to do these. And if you Google or click on that link, Where I'm From, these are poems that actually have a sort of template to them. And they're not only about where someone is from geographically, but the sights and the smells and the sounds and the experiences of what makes a person who they are. And so each of the participants wrote a Where I'm From poem. We're actually doing a virtual presentation next Tuesday. And if you click on that link, you can attend for free. We also asked the participants to submit photos or illustrations for a slideshow that will show at the beginning of the virtual event that tie in with their Where I'm From poems. You can see an illustration here. And here as participants in our virtual workshop. This next project is a bit more specific and specialized. Again, we partnered with MATV UMA, which is, by the way, the cable access television station, which is really more of a community media arts station. It does a lot more than just cable access, and they are one of the anchor institutions to Malden Reads. So we held what's called a film building workshop, which is people getting together. In this case, we did it virtually, and co-creating a film. They don't have any particular film background at all, but well, and the theme of it, jumping off from the novel, is that they explored is, what is the antidote to despair? And what they did was use their own cell phones and electronic devices to shoot footage on their own or meet in socially distant settings. It's really about community building. It's about people exploring this theme, sharing their ideas, and co-creating these very short films, and editing them collaboratively with the help of a film mentor. And then, of course, we have a virtual public screening, which you can click at that link and see the screening, and you can see the films that were created. And we were able to showcase what people created as well as their experiences they had in creating them. So really, here's scenes and images from the film building workshop, bringing people together from all backgrounds to create these films together. So really, this is all about collaborations. In 11 years of doing Malden Reads, you know, we find it's all about the organizations that we connect with, connecting our constituents, our marketing, our project ideas, as well as with artists and filmmakers and authors and scholars and people that you can connect with in your community or in the region, universities and so forth. So that is at the core, I think, of a community read program. And just one more thing that we wanted to share, and this could be an idea for folks. This is really more a tool people can use for collecting stories that's out there, and it's called a social wall. So if you Google social wall software, there's a couple of big companies. I put the links in here, and essentially what it does is it aggregates posts. If you put out a hashtag, we did it on Malden Together. It's all around the pandemic, but you could do it about the book that you're reading or the themes of the book, and you can throw out a hashtag, a prompt, say every week. And what it does is people post using that hashtag and it aggregates it onto a social wall. And then you can put that wall on a website, you can share that wall, but it's collecting all of these stories, these tweets, these images, these videos that people create in response to whatever prompt you put out there. It archives it, and it's just another way of sharing stories digitally, especially in this time. And there's a link to explore. So sharing stories make a difference, and I look forward to, I love hearing about everything that's happening with NEA Big Reads and community reads in all the communities across the country. So thank you for letting us share our story. Just stop this.
All right, so at this point, we're going to transition to our Q&A. So my colleague John from Arts Midwest will be facilitating this portion for us.
Hey everybody, just looking over our Q&A section. As we go, if you have more questions, feel free to put it into that Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. I think the best way to kind of run through this is, I've been seeing a few questions pop up that are the same, so we're going to kind of try to hit those big ones. The first one that I've been seeing a lot, and I think this kind of goes out to our friends at the NEA, is a question about the reduced reading list this time around. So there are questions around why these 6 books, why the reduced book total in general, and then our grantees limited to these titles in particular. So if anyone at the NEA would like to discuss that.
Sure, thanks, John. So when the NEA Big Read first launched in 2006, it was with 4 books on the list, and this list has really grown and changed and had different iterations over the years. And for this upcoming year, the reduction in the number of books and the focus on American history and culture is part of a new direction for the program, led by National Endowment for the Arts Chairman, Mary Ann Carter. And while each organization will have to choose one of these 6 titles, like I mentioned before, organizations may also choose to supplement their programming with other literary titles that relate in some way to their selected NEA Big Read book. And every community is really different, and we know organizations will find unique ways to explore their selected book. Thanks, Jen.
Great. So the next question I've seen pop up a couple of times, and Josh, maybe you want to respond to this, is what percentage of applications get funded, and just how competitive is the program?
Yeah, I can speak to that. So the goal is to fund approximately 75 awards for each grant year. And that is a different percentage depending on how many applications we get. But just know that I acknowledge that there is a lot of work that goes into this application, and we do encourage everyone that decides to submit a proposal to be as detailed as possible. But when April rolls around and notification is sent out, that if you are in the pool that perhaps doesn't get an award, we would encourage you to use whatever resources are at your disposal to take some of those plans that you formulated and at least implement some of them that you're able to implement, because this program is very transformative for the people that participate. The partnerships is one of the benefits as well, collaborating with organizations you haven't collaborated with in the past. So as much as that is able to be realized, that would be amazing.
Great. So next question I see pop up here is from Margaret. And that question is, how are you defining community? Would a college campus meet that definition, or would we want to expand beyond those walls? So Josh, or maybe somebody at the NEA, if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah, community is a very broad description, especially this year since virtual programming is a-okay for everybody. So in the college and higher ed institution purview, ideally we would, an application would be stronger if it was able to reach outside of the campus. So that's what we would encourage if that is within the capacity, within the capacity for you to implement that.
Great. So next up, I see a question here, and this is sort of for anybody who might know the answer. But what languages other than English are the book titles available in?
Lauren, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, no, I know The House of Mango Street and Beloved and The Grapes of Wrath is available in Spanish, and I believe also The Call of the Wild, but we're happy to follow up directly to finalize that with any other languages. But for Spanish, those are the titles I know that are available.
Great. So next question on the list here is, do you have specific types of community partnerships that you favor for applications from institutions or higher education?
I can take this one. We don't typically favor specific partnerships, but there is the requirement that if you're not a library, that you should partner with a library. And we have had a question from institutions of higher education before, and we ask that if possible, they partner with a library from town to meet that requirement. In addition to the library on campus. But other than that, all partnerships are welcome. We've seen partnerships with almost every kind of organization that you can imagine, nonprofit and for-profit alike.
Okay, and next up, this one is geared towards the NEA. Specifically, does receiving funding for Big Read prevent organizations from applying for other project funding?
No, it does not. You can apply for an NEA Big Read grant and another grant, a grants for at the NEA. So that's fine.
Great. Next one I see here is, this is a very optimistic one, which I like. So let's say we write a grant that concentrates on doing activities virtually, and then at some point life improves to the point where we can do in-person activities. Can we adapt our programming at that point?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I invite NEA to jump in as I answer, but my recommendation there would be to, when you're writing the application, be clear about your intent for what the plan A is. And you can also mention that if plan B, which I assume would be, things quite haven't gotten better to the point we would hope, that we would do these virtually if that ended up needing to be the case.
Yeah, no, thanks, Josh. And I wholeheartedly agree. And we understand that September 2021 is far away and things can change between now and then. So yeah, like Josh mentioned, mention your plan A, plan B, and we understand that, yeah, things aren't quite as known at this time. So yeah, just do your best.
Great. So next question I have is specifically for Anne. If you could speak a little bit about the film resources you used to develop that programming. And then let me see where I had it. There was a good one.
And while John's looking for that, I've seen some questions about the intent to apply deadline, and we do not have an intent to apply deadline, although we would recommend submitting your intent about a week before the application deadline. So that would put it around January 20th.
Apologies, I seem to have too many windows open.
I could just respond in terms of the film building. I'm the co-facilitator for Malden Reads, and I'm also the associate director for MATV, soon to be UMA Urban Media Arts, which is the community access television station, and more. So we do citizen journalism, podcasting, and film building is a new program. So we actually partnered with a guy named Tom Flint, who has been doing this and sort of created this model. So feel free to contact me. I don't know if he can share more information about this model, but he's been working directly with MATV, UMA to do these film building workshops, and then Malden Reads sponsored the one that was the Antidote to Despair.
Great, thank you, Anne. So a question here regarding budget. What percentage of your budget should go toward event fees, book giveaways, et cetera, and how many books do people usually include in their budget?
It's really a question of where how you're describing your community. But we typically see book purchases with grant funds in the realm of a couple hundred. And I see another question here where somebody asks something to the effect of, do we need to give these out for free? And while that's been the norm for all big reads, or for the majority of big reads that have been conducted in the past, if it works better for your budget for funding other parts of your NEA Big Read program, you can charge a nominal fee for book distribution if you need to.
Great. And I have a question here regarding panel review. Is there any reason that during the panel review process, the committee might give only partial funding of what was requested? Or is it the case that approved projects would be fully funded for the requested amount?
It is our intent that the awards would be at their full request.
Okay, and next question here. Are applications in cities and communities with higher populations more likely to get accepted for funding rather than small communities?
There is not a consideration of that in the review criteria.
Okay, and next question here, is it better for a library to apply or for an arts nonprofit? Does it matter which one submits the grant?
That does not matter. However, if the library submits the grant, they do not have to prove that they are forming a partnership with the library since they are the lead applicant. But if the nonprofit submits the application, they'll have to demonstrate that library partnership.
Great. And I have a question here specifically as it pertains to the Call of the Wild. How would this work in terms of the selection of Call of the Wild, as that title includes multiple stories? All of the other titles are single titles. So is this the entire collection of them, or would the grantees want to select one from that collection?
Lauren, I'll pass that to you since I've been talking a lot.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's the entire collection. We're adding some additional stories from Jack London. So you may have community programming or book discussions over one or more of the stories within that collection.
And if I can jump in here, since we're talking about books, there was somebody that said they missed the part about the companion books mentioned, and their question is, are we encouraged to include companion titles in our applications? And the answer to that is a resounding yes. We know that there is a reduction in books to 6. So in the guidelines, there is encouragement to bring in companion titles. And by that, we mean books that relate in some way thematically to one of the books that are on offer. And a companion book title can be something that reaches a younger audience. It can be a wholly different genre. If you have any ideas about what you want to run past us in terms of a companion book, we're happy to answer those questions at any time via email or set up a phone conversation with Arts Midwest afterwards. But companion books are highly encouraged.
Great, and I see a question here. Is a library partnership understood for higher education, which has libraries as part of the college, or must it be explicitly stated?
Ideally, it would be explicitly stated.
Great. Another question here as it pertains to budgets. Can the grant budget include fees for administering the grant? And then also, are grant recipients expected to distribute free copies of the selected book?
Yeah, we kind of answered the question about books and if you want to distribute those for free or charge a nominal fee earlier. The answer to that is either one is fine, although the majority is free giveaway. And the other question about including administrative expenses in your budget, yes, of course, we want to pay you for your time to implement this project.
Great. Someone here was wondering, can you apply every year for the Big Read?
And the answer to that is yes. The traditional requirement is that if you apply every year, that if you did book X year 1, you'd need to do book Y year 2. But since we are bringing back some of the older titles like Call of the Wild and Grapes of Wrath, if you've done that book before, we're kind of wiping the slate clean, so to speak. But if you did do that, if you're in that particular situation, it would be good to mention in your application. We have time for about 1 or 2 more questions because I know we're a little bit past the hour end time.
Next question I see here, just looking for a little bit of clarification, is it absolutely necessary to partner with a library? And then secondly, we are a small nonprofit poetry organization. Many of the poets are published themselves. Can we use those works as companion titles?
Yeah, I'll do my best to answer those questions. So the question about a library partnership, if you are applying and you're not a library, you would need to demonstrate a library partnership, and that can be as deep as you want it to be. Ideally, the deeper the better. And the second question, if you are planning to use some poets that you're already working with, if their work relates in some way, even loosely, to the book that you're intending to pick out of the 6, then that would work. And I will also say that we've had a couple questions about recording for this webinar, and it is being recorded, and we plan to share it out in the near future.
Great. Question here, can the big read be done across state lines?
Yes, absolutely. And a municipality can apply. I've seen that question. All right, so I think we're at time. I want to be respectful of everybody's time here today, and I also want to thank everybody for joining us. If we didn't get to answer your question, then please send us a message at the email address listed on your screen. We can also take any consultation requests through that email, and if you want to call us, we'll do our best to answer, and those are the hours of operation that we are at our desks and happy to help. So I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and we'll get that recording out as soon as possible. Thank you very much.